Welcome, friends. Welcome back to the March edition of our Funding Fridays webinar series. Um, Today, we're going to be discussing budgeting for federal agency grants. Um, and this is a very important topic because I think that I know I am all continually trying to figure out how to understand better, how to budget, particularly when it comes to unpacking all the institutional and programmatic requirements that vary, grant by grant. So this obviously is probably going to be the start, just the first of an ongoing conversation too. So it helps you with budgeting, developing budgets, pre-award budget costs, and in many ways, you know, the budget is the foundation of a successful research project. So for those of you that are fans of Funding Fridays, you'll probably heard a little bit of my spiel, but so the monthly Funding Fridays webinar series was launched this past fall by Associate Vice Chancellor Tamara Schneider and a group of sort of research officers across the university as a way to provide targeted supports and research development activities during this, particularly as we navigate our way through our new virtual reality. Hopefully, maybe we'll be able to start doing some of these in person. I don't know. So this webinar series also represents a collaboration between the Office of Research, which is what I represent. Oh, yes, I forgot to introduce myself, which is what I always do. I am Effie McLaughlin, the interim assistant university dean for research, and I do seed grant programs, internal funding grants for the Office of Research and undergraduate research development. And I've been in the Office of Research for probably just about 10 years now. So this Funding Fridays webinar series is a collaboration between the Office of Research, the Research Foundation Office of Award Pre-Proposal Support, or RFAPS, which hopefully many of you are familiar with. If you're not, John Sapogas, who's the director of that office, hopefully is on this webinar, but they have a number of programs, including a peer mentoring review process for grant proposals, which can be very useful particularly if you're resubmitting, but I mean, also if you're able to get something done and get some feedback on it before you submit, that is a very useful program. And then also the Cuny Office of Library Services, which has done a lot of, done a lot of events, including open access requirements, which was our last event. And they've, I think, really enriched this conversation. And I think that the conversation between sponsored research and the libraries, the expertise and the resources that the libraries brings to bear on this has actually been really helpful. So the goal of this webinar series is to create a living resource for research development, support, and information for researchers at all levels across the university, from undergraduates to adjunct lecturers to senior faculty members. And this webinar is being recorded and made available on the Office of Research website, which hopefully I put the link up here too, but also if you'll, we try to send it out, but you can visit our website at any time. So actually I guess we're not quite at the end of it yet, but I'm sort of amazed that we're nearing the end of our 2021 Funding Friday season. Over the summer, I think we're actually going to pause the Funding Fridays webinar series over the summer and try to organize some more, actually more along the lines of this webinar. We're going to try to do more sort of hands-on workshop or boot camp type things for grant writing, where we're actually going to get faculty members to break up into small groups and maybe do some peer review and get some more sort of hands-on applied grant writing instruction and training and information. But I encourage all of you to reach out to me if you have any ideas for topics you'd like to have addressed. We already have a few topics queued up for our next season, maybe over the summer, but definitely for the fall and the spring. And some of the suggestions have been, for example, the implications of the transition from the NIH SCORE program to the SHORE program and what sort of changes and impact, or what that's going to involve. Also discussions about Fulbright Awards, how to apply for them, what they are. and also limited submission award opportunities, which actually I'm currently working on a website about limited submission opportunities with Adam Greenberg at the Advanced Science Research Center. So again, as I said, please do not hesitate to reach out to me with all your ideas and requests about topics that we can do that can help you become more research productive. So as I said, this webinar is being recorded. So if you do not want to appear on screen on a YouTube video, please keep your cameras off. And just a little bit of housekeeping. This presentation will run for about 40 to 45 minutes probably. And we will definitely leave ample time at the end to answer any questions. And I believe that Melissa and Pauline have actually, they've organized sort of a practical spreadsheet exercise for you too. So that'll be new, and we'll see how that goes. But I will definitely, both my colleague Remy Dar, who is on this call and helps me organize these, we're both going to monitor the chat. And definitely what I will say to you is that, I mean, we've been pretty successful. So if you have any questions at any point throughout the presentation, please type them in the chat, and we make every effort to go back and get to all of your questions. So please do that. So allow me to introduce my good friends, Melissa Lazo, who is the Associate Director of Sponsored Programs at the Advanced Science Research Center, and Pauline Papoulis, who's the Director of the Office of Research and Sponsored Programs at Queens College. And they've agreed to sort of say a few words of introduction about themselves. So please, Pauline and Melissa, take it away.
Hi, everyone. My name is Pauline Papoulis, and I'm Director of Research and Sponsor Programs at Queens College. I've been part of the grants world at Cuny for approximately 22 years. I started my grants officer journey as an office assistant at John Jay College in the Sponsor Programs office. I was then asked to join Queens College as an assistant director in 2006. In 2013, I became director and have been at Queens College ever since then. So I've been at Queens College for about 15 years now. So I have an extensive background in the grants world at Cuny.
Yep, and I'm Melissa Lazo. I'm the Associate Director of Sponsored Programs Administration at the Advanced Science Research Center. So I've been in that position 5 years now. And prior to that, I was at the University of California, San Francisco, as a contract and grants officer there for about 4 years. And then prior to that, I was back in New York doing mostly contract proposals for city and state transportation projects. So a little bit of city, state, and lots of federal. Okay, so I think Pauline will start with the PowerPoint presentation. And then in the chat, you'll see that there's a link to additional worksheets. So there's a budget template that's blank that we're going to actually complete together after the PowerPoint presentation, as well as a sample Excel template. And then there's also a budget justification Word document. And those are all posted on that FundingFriday website with the link in the chat. So you can download them now or download them later if you want to just watch or actually do the Excel with us at the end of the PowerPoint presentation.
Thanks, Melissa. If we can go on to the next screen. As Melissa had pointed out, this is the website where you can get the applications, and you should have already received them in the email when you came into the session. There are 3 attachments: the template, the sample, and the justification sampler, which Melissa will be able to help you with later on. With all grants, there's an overview of documents with every proposal. These documents contain the abstract, which is usually a 1-page summary or a paragraph.
Yeah, it's a tablet. Yeah,
the other thing is your problem or statement of needs, your assessment. Why is this project important? What is the problem that you're trying to solve? Program goals and objectives. What do you propose to address the problem? What is your solution? Your implementation methodology, your program or research plan. How will you do this? How will this plan be implemented? Your evaluation plan. How will you know if this is successful? What tools can you use to measure your research? Your sustainability. Can this be replicated? Will it last? Key personnel and facilities. Can your team do what you propose? Do you have the resources to do it? What kind of expertise is required? Your budget. What do you need to do this? What kind of expenses will need to make this happen? And any other components that are part of the regular proposal, which is letters of support, your bio sketches, collaborative documents, etc. The research grant world is usually complex and constantly changing, as you can see from the picture. The process is complicated. There are deadlines, approvals, publications, peer reviews, scientific merits, etc. There's also approvals within your organization and review on the sponsor's ends. There's a great deal of pressure on all aspects. The purpose of your budget. Your budget is a blueprint for your project spending. Costs in the federal world, they use three terms. They should be allowable, allocable, and reasonable. To determine the total costs of your project, it's how much will you need to do the research? What will you need? Indicate to sponsors where the funds will be spent and what will be supported. You have to provide reasonable and necessary costs for what is proposed in order to complete the research. Your basic plan of fiscal operation. A basic budget should outline your costs. It helps reviewers determine how you will conduct the project. A good budget can reveal whether or not the proposed research was carefully planned and if it's feasible. Sponsors and reviewers look at what you're asking to see if it aligns with what you're telling them you're going to do in your proposal. So where do you begin? First and foremost, I cannot stress this enough, as you can see from the PowerPoint, read the guidelines. Read the guidelines. Read the guidelines. The funding opportunity announcement, or the FOA. The guidelines will let you know what costs are allowed, what you can and cannot budget, if the budget is flexible, how much the sponsor will allow, what the research should focus on, and what you will need for a successful proposal and budget to accommodate the goals of the project. And then contact your grants office. Definitely contact your grants office, because they will also let you know what's allowed within your institution, which is where familiarize yourself in your institutional policies and procedures come in. Look at the institutional policies and procedures of your institution. What does your institution allow? What costs are allowed? Can the costs that you're proposing be budgeted? Because post-award, you can budget them, but post-award, it may not be allowed for you to actually pay it out. For example, an honorarium. Did you know that honorariums are not allowed to be paid to faculty? You know, CUNY faculty cannot serve as consultants. So things like that, your grants office will let you know. And extremely important, as I said before, contact your grants office if you are interested in applying as soon as possible. Do not wait until 2 or 3 days before the grant, and I know many do because it just works out that way. But the later you wait, the more problems can arise, and there may be technicalities which both you and the grants office would have missed that may reject the proposal moving forward. So please contact your grants office. There are also other things such as agency restrictions which your grants office would know. For example, NIH has salary caps. If you make above base on a salary over a 12-month period, the grants office will know how to calculate that in your budget. In addition, NSF has a 2-month limit. So if you need more time, there is a certain clause in the guidelines of NSF which may allow you to do so. However, please speak with your grants office regarding this, and they can assist you with planning your budget and your proposal. How do you begin the budget? Okay, align the budget with your program narrative. Once you know the details of your narrative, and it could just be a draft at that point, but once you know the details of your narrative, you'll have an idea of what you will need to make the research work, what kind of costs you will need. This assures that the budget items are specifically related to the actual costs described in the proposal. This will tell you if you need supplies, equipment, personnel, an assistant, a consultant, maybe a collaborator. Consider what type of personnel you need to perform the work. What kind of expertise is required to do this? What kind of personnel? Do you need students? Do you need a postdoc? Do you need evaluators? Do you need consultants? And then outline what other resources you need to complete the task indicated in the proposal. This would be certain other things such as research supplies, publication costs, books, human subjects, animal care costs, things like that, in order to be able to outline what you would want in an actual budget. Next slide, please. Because we don't want this. This basically says we did not budget correctly. We don't want to be left with either not having enough funds to complete the project, or we did not budget correctly and there's too much money and now we have to return all the funds back to the sponsor. Those are two things that the sponsor does not like. So we don't want this. Next slide. Thank you. Two main categories in budgeting for your proposal. You have your direct costs and you have your indirect costs. Simply put, your direct costs are the actual costs that are directly related to your research, and those costs that will be allocated and detailed in your budget. Indirect costs are a little bit different. They are not as easily identifiable as the direct costs in your budget. These are costs that are incurred by the college or the institution for maintaining research on campus. These are costs that the college allocates to maintain the facilities you use, your lab, utility bills, IRB, IACOOK, your grants office, etc. And it's usually a flat rate, which your grants office can assist you in calculating when it's time to do your budget. Budget basics. Budget should be based on all phases of your research. So you have project development, project implementation, and project evaluation. Your project development, what do you need to do this? Your project implementation, what is needed to make this project run? And your project evaluation, what other kind of costs did you not account for? So just think simply, people, place, and thing. People. Who do you need to assist with this project? What kind of expertise is required to do the research? Do you need a technician? Do you need research assistants, a postdoc, a graduate student, undergraduate students? Do you have collaborators, consultants, evaluators? Even though collaborators, consultants, and the evaluators, those would most likely be OTPS costs and considered OTPS costs, they are still part of the people that you need in order to do your research. And then second of all, what about your time? How much time will you be spending on this project? And then don't forget the fringe benefits for personnel that will be working on the actual project. Place. Where is the research taking place? What costs do you need for that? Do you have to travel? Does anyone need to come with you? Is it in your lab? Any other facilities are being used? Those are things that you have to think about when you're actually preparing to do your research and your proposal, including your narrative. Who's working with you? Do you have to go anywhere? Are there any other lab facilities that you will be using? And then the thing. Thing is everything else. What kind of supplies are we going to be using? What kind of lab equipment? Do you need to purchase specialized equipment? Does this equipment need to be maintained? Do you have lab fees? Are you sending samples to another facility? Do you have to budget for that? How will you budget for that? Do you need software? Check with your grants office, check with your Office of Technology, because sometimes the software may be offered at your CUNY campus. So those type of things you can actually request and you can get on your already from your campus. If you need outside software, CUNY has certain approvals that you need as well. Publications. Publication costs are expensive. Can it be budgeted? Does the sponsor allow it? Chemicals. Do you work in a lab? Do you need the chemicals? Do you need those basic research supplies? Animals. Animal fees, costs for caring for the animals, food, animal care costs, other fees that are involved with that, human subjects. Are you paying research subjects? If so, how much? How? These are things that you have to think about when you're actually preparing your budget. And then in summary, again, I just want to say that please read the guidelines. The guidelines are particularly important when it comes to actually putting your budget together and putting your whole proposal together. Contact your grants office as soon as possible. You know, there are certain things that your grants office can assist you with and certain approvals which may be required within your actual organization. You know, some proposals require cost share, which, you know, it's not really going to be addressed in this particular slide. That's a whole topic entirely separate. But those type of things your grants office can help you with. And then just think simply, people, place, and thing based on the activities you propose in your actual application. I'm going to pass it over to Melissa, who will actually be working with you on the sample spreadsheet and the budget justification. Melissa, it's all yours.
Great, thanks.
Thank you.
Okay, so later the PowerPoint presentation will be uploaded to the website. So as you can see, I've taken screenshots of the budget sample Excel, and they're in the PowerPoint presentation. So if you lose the Excel, it's in the PowerPoint, vice versa. Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and X out of the PowerPoint, and I'm going to open up the Excel budget template. So you can either just watch and follow along, or if you have two screens, which some of you might, you can do it alongside of me. So you can pick which you prefer, and I'm going to make this probably a little bigger. There we go. Okay, can everyone see that? Thumbs up? Is that Excel?
We're still seeing the PowerPoint. I think you have to, did you stop
okay.
share? And then.
Okay, let me X out of that.
Yeah, I think in Zoom you have to stop share before you open up a new window. It's a little
Okay.
unwieldy.
Screen.
Yeah, there we
Okay.
go. Yeah, now we see
Great.
the spreadsheet.
Okay. So this is just sort of a template, right? So every CUNY campus, you're probably going to have your own internal budget Excel that the grants office needs you to submit to them or do with them. So this is just sort of a generic one, just if you want to try to throw some costs together before you even want to know or decide you're going to do a proposal. So very simply, we have, budget periods at the top based on 12 months for each year. And then you have your senior personnel, right? So this is the PIs, the co-PIs, the co-investigators, right? So these are the people that are responsible for the management of the proposal and of the project. So you'll see here, most of the senior personnel will be 9-month appointments, right? The professors at Cuny are on 9-month appointments, so they're either collecting summer salary or academic year and being released from courses, right? So definitely talk with your grants office if you're doing your academic year and being released from courses, as that could be very department specific on how much effort is needed to be released from a course, right? And that might have multiple approvals within your department as well. So that's critical. You talk with your grants office and department. So I'm going to go ahead and start putting some names and budgets in here. So I'm going to just put Sally Brown in here, and she's going to be a PI. And what I'm going to do is to put the institutional base salary in here, right? So this is, let's say $150,000 for, senior PI. And then usually salaries can be escalated, right? By about 3%, but that might also be based upon your campus. Like for NIH, they don't allow escalation, right? So these are the things you need to communicate with your grants office. And then effort. Let's say 1 month of effort. So I'll go ahead and put in 1, and automatically that salary requested takes the base salary divided by a 9-month appointment. So 9 months times the number of months. And then I'm just going to drag that across and assume it's 1 month each year. Right, so pretty simple. That's the salary requested, right? So those are real numbers that can be audited, right? And then of course we could add more co-PIs. I'm gonna skip over adding more people, but in the sample you can add more people, right? And this would just be senior personnel at your campus. So if you are collaborating with another campus, say Queens College or City College or Hunter or Queensboro, that grants office will also need to be coordinating with your grants office. And usually it's a sub-award, right? Even though we're all sister campuses under the Research Foundation of Cuny, they have their own way of budgeting, which needs to be on a separate budget and then totaled together. But of course, the grant offices can help with that. Okay, so the next part is your other personnel, right? So these are usually personnel that are 12-month appointments, your postdocs, your graduate students, your research assistants, your technicians. All of those people. And a lot of time they're to be named, right? But sometimes you already have staff on payroll. So it's great to provide names if you know, but otherwise to be names, are acceptable. So I'm going to throw in a to be named postdoc starting at $58,500, and you'll see it automatically escalated by that 3%. And let's go ahead and let's put this postdoc on for 6 months. So about half a year, right? So the postdoc's on another grant already, and we're putting this grant in. And then let's go ahead and put in a graduate research assistant, right? So these are your PhD students, and let's put that salary in at $32,000, and let's do a full-time. So 12 months each year. Right, so this is all of your salary requested, and those totals add up very quickly, you'll see, right? So this is totals for all of your personnel, for the PI, the postdoc, and the graduate research assistant, and that's just the salaries. Okay, so now that we know who's working on this and about how much time is needed to support the scope of the project, we now have the fringe. So you'll see this fringe table. These are all of the Research Foundation's current fringe rates, and you'll see some of them have gone up as of April. So the graduate research assistants, the full-time and part-time A will go up to 38, as well as the normal part-time. And that 0.34% is that MTA tax, which also gets tacked on. So you'll definitely want to make sure and communicate with the grants office about which rate is appropriate for which person, because it can be very specific according to their appointments. Right, so we automatically assumed Sally Brown collecting summer salary. So she gets a 26.7% fringe. And then the postdocs, even though it's only 6 months, still a full time because he's working another 6 months on another project. So that's automatically calculated from the postdoc salary. And the graduate research assistant at 9.34%. So all of those fringe benefits, right? That includes our health insurance, workers' comp. I mean, there's so many areas that fall into fringe benefits. So those are all calculated there. So our total personnel over 3 years is about $300,000. So this budget adds up very quickly. Okay, and then equipment, right? So for basically, I think all campuses, right, equipment is $5,000 or more. And usually that equipment should be requested upfront in the project, right? So in the first couple of years of the project. Otherwise, if you request it in the last year of the budget, the sponsor is going to ask, why do you need equipment at the end, right? You should have been working on this project all of the years. So usually that needs to be upfront in the budget request. So let's just put in $6,000 mass spec. And equipment is specific as most campuses, indirect rates exclude equipment from their indirect calculations. And if you change that from proposal to award time, you usually need sponsor approval, which is another layer of emails and approvals, right? So this is very important to get it correct in the proposal. And then travel, right? So we have domestic travel. A lot of times it's to conferences to disseminate the research. And it might be for that PI, that postdoc, and the student, or it might just be for a couple of people. So you want to make sure conference fees, flights, trains, per diem, all of that is included. As you know, conferences add up, although a lot of them are virtual right now. So, and then of course, international travel needs to be separate, right? That is a line item that is also scrutinized by the federal sponsors. And to thoroughly justify that, if one of your conferences is always held in Paris, which sounds wonderful, you can provide that as a specific example of where you intend to travel. And then we have our participant support costs, another tricky category, right? So stipends are specifically for trainees. The most typical participant stipend I see is for undergraduates training in the summer. A lot of that is useful for NSF broader impacts, right? So if you're training, right? So the keyword there is training. They're not employees. They might receive a $5,000 stipend over the 3 summer months. All right, and then if they're traveling, right? So this is separate than your personnel travel costs. These, they might be traveling to field sites to do field work and other instances, right? So you have to make sure with your grants office that that is also detailed, with flight and per diem and all of those details. And then your other direct costs, there's a bunch: supplies, your publication costs, consultant services, right? So consultants, usually when we're working with other institutions across the country, that PI, let's say at University of Texas, Austin, might say, oh, well, I don't want to do a sub-award to UT Austin. It's too much work. Can I just be a consultant? Well, there's a whole nother layer of questions that come with that, right? Can they work outside of their institution? Does their appointment allow for that? If they're going to be using their UT Austin computer, that's not allowed. They can't use their facilities and resources at their institution, but their institution isn't getting compensated for it, right? So there's a bunch of questions your grants office can work through you with and work with that PI or that potential university to see if it's allowable. So let's throw some numbers in here. So let's do about, I don't know, $7,000 of supplies. Let's just do it each year to make it simple. And maybe publication costs more in the outer years, right? That first year is really a ramp up year. And then some ADP computer services that might be very specific to your grants office or to fees at your campus. And then you have your subawards, right? So as I said earlier, if you're working with another Cuny campus, usually their budget, their total costs will go into this line item. And then if you're working with UT Austin or UCSF, any of those, that grants office will need to send a detailed budget, and then you can total their costs in here. So let's just say that's about $75,000 a year for a sub to, let's stick with UT Austin. Then facility fees. At the ASRC, we have so many facilities, and a fabrication facility, I could go on and on. So, or if there's other facilities, you know, at College of Staten Island, with the computing system, a lot of times those fees can go in here. And let's just say that's for the first couple of years. Right, alterations, renovations, this is more typical for big center grants or equipment grants, right? So that's very funding opportunity specific. Tuition and fees, that's mostly for the graduate research assistants. So you'll wanna check those tuition and fees, right? Depends upon their level, years of experience, how many credits they'll take, right? And a lot of the times that's estimated. Okay, so now all of our costs have added up. So this total direct cost includes all the personnel and all of the OTPS, right? So travel, supplies, subcontracts. And then at about half the CUNY campuses, our indirects are based on modified total direct costs. And what does that mean? Basically, it's your total costs minus these items, right? So your campus won't collect indirects on equipment or the participant support costs or any of these other items. At the other half, the CUNY campuses, it's just based on salary and fringe, right? So your personnel. So you definitely want to communicate with your grants office to figure out how much and the percentage and the base, because that adds up very quickly. So a lot of us CUNY campuses who use the modified total direct cost base, we're in the 50s, right? So about 57% indirects, which is an additional total about $220,000, right? So this budget is now total costs, directs plus indirects of about $860,000. And you'll notice a lot of times with NIH, they say a max budget, and they'll say of $275,000, and that's direct costs. And then other times NSF or DOD will say, well, it's $275,000 max budget of total costs, which is a huge difference when indirects are 57%. So that's definitely something to keep in mind when you're reading a funding opportunity and you're starting to think about the scope of the work. What realistically can I propose with the budget that we develop together? So that's sort of budgeting quickly, right? And that's after you've sort of figured out your scope, who's working on it, and who the key personnel are. And it adds up very quickly.
So is that, are you ready for some questions, or you have more? Do you want to, I don't know. I mean, is there another part of your presentation that you want to do, or do you want to take some
I can just quickly show the budget justification.
Oh, right. Absolutely.
I'm not going to go through it, but let me share screen. So this is sort of a typical what our budget justifications look like, right? So every single item on that Excel is described. There's the PIs and just a little bit of their tasks on the proposal, right? The more, you know, it doesn't need to be that long, right? Because the scope and the actual project narrative should be in the proposal. So it talks about the senior personnel and then the other personnel, right? So it just details that's their effort and a couple of tasks that they will perform. You know, the fringe benefits, as well as the equipment and travel. Sometimes I know with Department of Defense, they'd like to see quotes, or if you're doing an NSF MRI proposal, they need a quote for the equipment, right? So you have to make sure you get that quote ahead of time, because that can take a while from vendors. Travel, they love to see about how many days, you know, estimates for transportation, hotel, per diem, conference fees, how many people are attending. And then your participant support costs for a couple of undergraduate students will receive those stipends, right? Your supplies. And the detail of supplies varies as well, of what's required from each sponsor. NSF and NIH sort of you can estimate and group them into large categories. Department of Defense, they want a table of the exact supply, the cost per unit, how many units total, much more detailed. Publication costs, so that's all here. Subawards, you know, this is a sample of University of Maryland, basically saying, please see their budget and justification, right? Facility fees, tuition, and then the indirect costs, right? So this is our rates are approved by the Department of Health and Human Services, and these are the rates we're using on this proposal. So all this is on the Funding Friday website.
I think it's also important to note that the budget justification should only describe what you're requesting from the sponsor. Don't add anything else, because then it can also be deemed as cost share, which is something that the university does not allow.
Right, and most federal sponsors don't even allow it, right? So if it's in there, it could be, the whole proposal could be returned without review. And that's definitely something, you know, we look for to make sure it gets to the next stage of review.
Well, great. Thank you. So there's some questions that started to come in. You know, it occurred to me as we were going through this, that maybe if we do this again, it might be useful to have, because like on one hand, I guess I was thinking of this as, I mean, this is pre-award budgeting, but a lot of pre-award budgeting, you know, might be useful to have somebody from the RF, like a project manager or a program administrator at the RF on this, because a lot of this sort of how you plan sort of pre-award is also impacted by what the post-award administration is going to look like.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And actually, we got a really good question, or actually more of a comment, and I don't know if you guys know about this. I mean, of course you know about it, but I mean, there are, as you said, you were calculating this based on modified total direct, because the ASRC and Queens are schools where their F&A rate is based on total direct costs, which means personnel and OTPS. Whereas, I mean, I work in central office and we have our own DUNS number and our own F&A rate, but we have what is called a short form school, which is it's the F&A is only applicable to salaries, wages, and fringe. So we're considered a short form school. And I think this is what Dr. Gorkover was referring to, where she said that please note schools with indirect costs based on salary and fringe must budget the MTA payroll tax as other and not under fringe benefits. Because yes, she had noticed that you, Melissa, had included the MTA tax into your fringe. So do you guys know, I mean, I don't want to put you on the spot because I don't know, but do you know exactly what the MTA tax is? I bet Pauline, you know, because you
the MTA tax came on as a separate temporary tax, which was passed on to employers. And then it was tagged on to all grants for salaries only. So we use it under fringe benefits because that's when you look on the web report for the Research Foundation, the MTA tax is listed under fringe benefits. It's not listed under OTPS. And then when they report financial reporting, it actually goes under the fringe benefits. So we list it under the fringe benefits because it's tagged onto the salary, and it is 0.34% of every $1, I believe it is. So it's the salary divided by 100 times 0.34, and that's basically how you calculate the MTA tax in itself. And it came on several years ago, and it just never left.
Well, great, because I think a lot of people probably are not even, if you haven't done these budgets a million times before, you might not even be aware that the MTA tax exists. And so, but again, this is as an example of where it's really important to speak to your grants officer, because the long form schools are the schools that use modified total direct, they include it in the fringe, whereas the short form schools are the ones that only have F&A applicable to salaries and wages, and fringe have to use it as a separate line item. Okay, so I have a question. Actually, maybe if you could bring up again, Melissa, we just had a request in here that said, could you pull up the spreadsheet section listing PI, co-PI, and graduate student salary again? Could you just shift back to that? I guess to the sample, to the worksheet, the sample worksheet. Because
Can you see this or?
No, I think
No.
you're gonna have to. You're still in the.
Yeah,
you're gonna have to stop sharing and then go back into the spreadsheet. So we have a question here about if the grant involves high school students working on their campus, does one include it in a subaward?
High school students is a little bit tricky because you're going to need a lot of permissions in order to do that. So if you do have high school students, obviously you're going to need permission from the parents because they're under the age of 18. But are you paying the school or are you paying the students directly? I think that's my question to them.
It's essentially what I was looking for was a grant involving a high school student who was my CSI student, where they'd be doing some experiments on their campus. So you'd be paying the high school.
Okay, so then that's a whole different issue because you would have to do an MOU to the school. So that involves a lot of things. So if it's a New York City, say, high school, you have to do an MOU with New York City Department of Education. And that's something that has to be done in advance. And then they would need to create some sort of budget on how the students will be paid. So you'll be paying New York City Department of Education. The high school may not get the funds directly from you, but New York City Department of Education would get the funds directly. And then they would have to allocate the funds to the actual high school. It works kind of differently, so it all depends. If it's a private high school, you would do it with the private high school. But New York City Department of Education works somewhat differently, and the MOU would be with the entire New York City Board of Ed. Even though the high school would be involved, they would have to spearhead it, but the MOU would be involved with them.
And this even applies for just supplies which the students need, is it, to do the experiments?
If you're paying the high school, yes. If you're purchasing the supplies directly from your project, yes, and then giving it to them, it's different. But if they are purchasing it themselves and they're getting reimbursed, then yes, it would have to go through there.
What would be easier? Would it be easier to put it essentially as a part of the budget where we are providing the supplies to them? Would that be best to work?
Possibly, yes, but you would still need that collaboration agreement with the high school and New York City Department of Education, so that this way you have that to fall back on.
This is actually New Jersey, so this would be an MOU that you need. That has to.
You would have to work with the Cuny office to possibly come up with some sort of collaboration agreement.
Yes.
To work with the high school. And it's something that I definitely do advise speaking with the legal offices and the research office at Cuny to come up with something like that.
Dr. Raja, are you at College of Staten Island?
Yes, I'm at CSI.
Okay, well, you're in luck because Ann Luckton House, your grants officer, is actually on this call. So she can definitely help you with this.
Yeah, I'll talk to her about it.
So actually, I have a question. So it's for you, Pauline and Melissa. I mean, just a sort of a clarification thing that I think can cause some confusion. when we're budgeting. So it's this question of, could you calculate the effort in months? And you have down here both, you sort of smoosh together academic year and summer. And I know that there's a difference. I mean, could you just say a little bit about calendar year versus academic year versus summer salary and how staff effort is calculated? Can you just talk about that a little bit? Because I think this can often cause confusion.
Sure. I can start off, Melissa, if you want to jump in at any time, please do.
Yeah.
Most faculty are on a 9-month appointment. So that means that your contract, even though you get paid over the course of 12 months, your contract is still 9 months. So it's usually from September to May. And your salary is based on just those 9 months. You can receive an additional 3 months of summer salary on top of your 9-month appointment if you are in a 9-month appointment. If you're on a 12-month appointment, that means that you cannot receive additional salary. It's just 12 months, that's it. You are being basically released for your time to devote the effort to the project. Released from your regular administrative duties or your regular duties in order to be able to work on the project. We do calculate it in person months because the federal government does prefer to have it in person months. So I do need to point out that this has nothing to do with release time. Nothing to do with release time. If you need to be released, you really need to speak to your dean and your chair in order to get released from your courses. But the effort on the grant is the time you're devoting to the project. So if you're devoting 10% over the course of 12 months, that's what, 1.2 months? That's basically what you're devoting. If you're devoting only, say, 10% of 3 months, that's 0.03 months. And that's just for the summer. If you're devoting 10% of your 9-month, that's 0.09 months. So you have to calculate it in terms of when are you devoting the time? Is it during the academic year, which is a 9-month appointment, or during the summer, which is 3 months appointment? Because one, the fringes are different. You have 51% fringe during the academic year because of your benefits. That gets paid to the state. If you have summer salary, you also have benefits during that time, which also do get paid to the state. So, but it's different because you're not on contract during the summer, technically.
Unmute myself. Great. Thank you. But I think what's important too is that she said, because I think, again, course release is different than staff effort. And that's just something you can't, if you put that you want to have academic year effort, that doesn't necessarily translate into course release. That's a discussion that you need to have with your chair and your dean and within the within your school. So that's,
yeah, it's important to note that the federal government doesn't care whether or not you're being released from your course. What they want to know is whether or not and how much time you're devoting to this project and only this project. So if you are being released for one course, during the time that you would have been teaching, are you really devoting that entire time to this project? 9 out of 10 times you are. But the thing is that that's not what they want to know. They want to know how much time in person months or in percentage you are devoting to just the project that you are proposing. So is it realistic if you're saying 3 months, I'm devoting 3 months to this project? Are you really? If you calculate the time, are you really devoting the full 3 months? And then include summer salary too, because a lot of people like to budget 3 months full summer salary. But during the summer, if you are teaching a course and getting paid by Cuny, you can't get paid 3 months summer salary. If you are going on vacation for 2 weeks, you can't get paid 3 months summer salary. Those 2 weeks don't count. If you are taking a day off here and there, it cannot be your full summer salary. It has to be devoted just to that project in the full term that you're devoting it, because that's what we're telling the federal government, that's what we're charging.
great. Thank you. So I have a question here. What's the difference between graduate research assistant as other personnel and budgeting for graduate student tuition?
So the graduate research assistants, right, are the PhD students. So that's, if you have a GRA, you can request tuition and fee reimbursement. I don't deal that much with the master's students or in requesting tuition for master's students. I don't know if you deal with that, Pauline?
Sometimes we do have faculty who like to budget, and just to note, you can't budget tuition and stipends on an NIH research grant. NIH doesn't allow it. But usually on NSF grants, some faculty like to budget graduate students, master's students, I should say, master's students for stipends, and it is a separate line. It has to be a separate line. It is exempt from indirect, so it has to be the separate line for just tuition. We don't necessarily put it under participant support costs. We usually put it under other in the tuition fees, yes.
Great. Also, we have another question. Does the application look weaker or less acceptable if the budget doesn't account for 9 months salary and accounts for 3 credit per semester instead, or summer salary instead?
It depends on the proposal. It depends on the amount of work you're saying you're going to do, and realistically, when are you going to do it? If it's something that you're going to do that requires a lot of work and a lot of traveling, and it's only the time that you can do during the summer, then it's fine to budget during the summer. But if it's something that has to be an annual, yearly thing, like, some people, their research, you're studying butterflies and butterfly migration, there's a certain period for that. So that period might fall under, say, for example, the springtime. The springtime happens to fall in between the summer, early summer, June, because that's summer, and then right around May. So you might need some portion in that, but you can get away with just charging a month of summer salary in June. Some people, I had a recent proposal that just went in that had to deal with hunting. Hunting season for, say, deer is in the wintertime. It starts around November. So he would need release time during that portion. So he would need time during there that he would have to budget. So for November, December, and January, those months would need to be budgeted. So it depends on your proposal and the scope of your project.
Great. Well, we're nearing, it's almost 1 o'clock. I don't see any more questions in the chat. I have to say this was super. I've been budgeting for a while now too, but actually I learned some stuff too. And I think this has been really helpful. And we are going to leave these materials on our website. So you will have this very useful budget spreadsheet that you can work from. That you can also, is it editable, Melissa? So if they want to go in and change the F&A rates and all that kind of stuff, they can do that?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good. So it's editable.
Yeah.
And did
So you can change,
not editable.
yeah, change the indirects. And then, of course, if your indirects are based on salary and fringe, you can change this here and just change the base,
Again, I think so. We have a follow-up question based on, Pauline, your response. So I think, again, this goes back to sort of the course release versus effort question. So it's how would you do the math for 3 credits per semester? Is the proportion of the full credit load the proportion of 9 months salary?
I think it varies per school.
Yeah. Okay.
I believe it varies per school, so that's something that they need to check with their particular grants office with. And for example, at Queens College, the administration has decided that it's going to be based on 18 credits. So if you want one course, that's 3 divided by 18, so that's about 16.67% of your actual salary plus 51% fringe. So it depends on the institution. I believe every college has done it a bit differently. So you really need to check with your grants office.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. This is an excellent example of yeah. I mean, really, if you're starting to thinking about a proposal, I know the first stages are always sort of, outlining or working out the project description. But I mean, as I had sort of mentioned in the beginning, budgeting is sort of integral to creating the project description. So the earlier that you can go and speak to your grants office about all the things that you need to know to do this, the better. And also, I think, again, as I said, I think it may be a future version of this will include someone from the RF, because it occurred to me that there's a lot of questions that come up in terms of how the post-award administration, a lot of these questions play out at the post-award stage, and hopefully if you get if you get the grant. And I don't know, I think it might clarify the whole process a little bit more too. Well, great. This is fantastic. It's just 1:00. Thank you so much, Pauline and Melissa. And
Thank you,
these will be
Effie.
on the website. And definitely reach out to me or Remy or any of us if you have any, any new ideas how we can make this better or other webinar topics that we can cover. So have a great weekend, everyone. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Effie. Thanks, Melissa.
Thank you.
Thanks, Remy.
Thanks, guys.
Everyone, take
Bye.
care.